Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes. This is Legal Matters, the program that's been designed to address the critical and sometimes contentious issues that are facing businesses and consumers today. It's legal information, practical solutions, and straight talk about a wide variety of topics that will affect your home and work life. We want to always begin by thanking our legal counsel and sponsors from Bazar Grasso Law Firm in East Providence, both Jackie Grasso and David Bazar. David's with us today. Welcome,
Hi, Debbie.
So today, simply, what do we want to begin with? Simply, you've been hacked. Now what? Recently we've discussed privacy issues, specifically that the police are no longer allowed to access your cell phone's information, vital information, without a warrant. But you are vulnerable in many ways thanks to the wonders of Internet technology. So your credit card, your identity, your money, all very vulnerable thanks to the Internet. The good news is that if your ATM or your debit card is lost or stolen, federal limits the amount of liability, or completely limits your liability for those unauthorized charges. But there are plenty of other things that you need to worry about. What do you do, what kind of card you have, when you report the loss, all of these things tend to be problems, and how do you dispute those bills? The headaches go on far longer than the next credit card or debit card that the banks may issue. So lots to tackle here. Where's your liability? Let's start with what the responsibilities are. So David, how many people you can possibly tell, even in your own family and friends circles, have been hacked? What do people do? What happens?
Well, there's a number of different ways that this can happen. Certainly it can happen online through computers and the Internet, using credit cards at different websites. We've heard stories, horror stories, about people who just go to a store and use their credit card. I think Target had a big issue with that, and there have been many others. And then there's the stealing of your information, your personal information, from different ways. And we can talk about each of those things and what happens. And we all have personal stories about what happened. I can tell you, when I first got married, my daughter was in the hospital, and somewhere from the records in the hospital, someone stole my information. And the next thing I know, my wife is calling me up and asking, why do we have liens on our property? Why are people calling? And what happened was, the information that was in the records at the hospital were taken by someone who was opening up credit cards and taking out information on myself, and I had to deal with all that. So the starting point was by starting with the credit reporting companies in that instance, and trying to have them take the information off my record, and then calling each of the stores where credit was opened in my name and dealing with that. That was a very difficult situation. And interestingly enough, the agency in charge of enforcing and investigating that is the Secret Service.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. When this would have happened, obviously it was at least more than a decade ago.
Yes.
It sounds like you had a few steps to go through. The nightmares that we hear and that we read about, even in preparing for this, indicate that long after you've thought you've corrected it, this haunts you.
Right.
Countless weeks, months, even years later. How do you, with today's ATMs and credit cards, how do you manage to limit what those losses are? I understand that if your ATM is gone, the banks can't say, gee, you'll have to
make good
on every single nickel, dime, and quarter that came through.
Right.
So what do you do to limit your losses? Do you have any thoughts about that, David?
Well, certainly the first thing to do is, and it depends, again, let's talk about the situation. Me again, so I lost my wallet. And so the first thing I did was to call every credit card company in the bank where my ATM card was, to let them know that I had lost it. So they immediately, of course, will give you a replacement card, but then they'll close down the old accounts so that additional charges can't be made. If you report your card stolen, generally speaking, the credit card companies are very good about limiting the amount that you're responsible for, if any, on those cards, as long as you've taken the necessary steps.
So I remember hearing what seems to be quite a while ago, that your credit card limit was $50. After that, you were not responsible. But apparently it was very open-ended if you had an ATM/debit card. Did they put a cap on that? Is there protection now with that, or is that still open-ended so they can continue to drain your wallet?
Well, credit cards are treated very differently, or were at least, from ATMs. Because ATM is like a open invitation to take money out of your account as opposed to a credit card where the credit company is giving credit to you to purchase something. So they have a little bit more leverage with the merchants that are dealing with them. I don't know if they've changed the rules on ATM. I know there have been discussions about using, because if you look at your ATM cards, a lot of consumers will say, well, it says MasterCard on it or Visa, so they think they're treated the same. I'm not sure that they are, which is why we always tell folks, if you're going to use an online credit card to buy something at a website, at an Amazon or wherever it might be, use a credit card, not an ATM card.
Good to know. People sometimes will have the card physically taken. Your wallet's stolen, there goes the card. But more sinister and quite popular is the opportunity that many cyber thieves get to access your account number, whether it's credit or debit, and they have only the number. Is there a difference in how you should handle the card being physically stolen versus the fact that just the number itself was stolen and you only find out about that when you receive that extra $2,000 charge, Dave?
Right. It's harder to know when the number has been stolen itself as opposed to the card lost or stolen, because physically, if you know it's not there, you know there's an issue. So if you suspect, and you have reason to suspect, that the card has been somehow tampered with, or you've lost it, someone's gained your information, then you should immediately again call the credit card company and alert them. So you would treat it the same way once you know. The problem is you don't necessarily find out as quickly as you would by losing it.
You know, maybe this is the time for me to share a personal anecdote, and it was about one of the credit cards, and I was on vacation, and I still had access to my email. The credit card company, which I was suspicious of in the first place, sends me an email that there's been fraud. Well, I didn't have the card physically stolen. I still had it in my wallet. I took it out and I called that number rather than hitting an email, just because I wasn't sure that wasn't a fraud too. But when I did get to that telephone number and spoke to the fraud department, I explained to them that there was an email that says, I think there's a fraud, or you think that there's a fraud, could you check this out? They had a complete listing of the suspected charges. I can't even tell you I understand how they knew which ones would be suspect, but as they would tick off one $8 charge, which I guess is what someone uses to initially check to see if that card is valid, and then they hit $1,000 and then they hit $2,500. So the nightmare, apart from the fact that they said that they will cancel that card number immediately, glad I had another one in spare, but immediately the online accounts that would take an annual subscription, an Adobe account, some other online, it's no longer able to tap and use that card. So I had, heaven forbid, unprotected search. And in that 1 or 2 days of unprotected search, now my accounts are hacked, because I had no antivirus software that was paid for and viable. Now I have another whole set of problems to deal with. Does the credit card company bear any liability for that, considering they were simply telling me what was going on? Adobe had no idea of why I wasn't paying. Where does that end of loss and liability come?
Yeah, I don't think that the credit card company would have any liability. In fact, they were pretty vigilant in alerting you to the fact. And it reminds me of a situation with myself where I never respond to those emails, but I'm on vacation. I get the email on my phone like you probably did. And your first thing is this actually real? Is somebody fishing to get information from me? What's that all about? So I did the same exact thing you did, which was to call the number on the back of the card, and they questioned about some charges out of the country. And what you're supposed to do, and I didn't know because I was actually out of the country, was alert them, let them know in advance when you're going out of the country, because when they start seeing foreign charges on a card like that, that's one of the things that sets off the alert to them that there might be a fraud going on. So they, in that case, asked me. I told them, no, that's me. The other thing that you do bring up is when your card is lost or stolen, like mine was, and the card is canceled, you have to try to remember, and maybe you should keep a list somewhere of all of the places where you've used your card for automatic renewals of things. For example, it could be if you have a data plan on an iPad, if you have a membership charge at a gym or something, any place where there's this regular charging that goes on, so you can let them know that card is no longer the one that I need to use, and here's the new card.
You know, you bring up several interesting points that are all prophylactic. Plan ahead. Yes, you mentioned earlier, take another card, or I've thought of even taking another card. But if you have a list of what the X dates are or what the account numbers are, you can somewhat anticipate how to add to your to-do list, but at least not be shut off, because mine was the antivirus that was shut off. And I had no idea with that unprotected search on a couple of websites that I also wouldn't know were likely to be having spyware, malware, or whatever infecting the computer. Suddenly there's a host of troubles that just go on for weeks and weeks. These days, because the hacking is so rampant, not surprisingly, wonders of capitalism, there are many companies, AARP, and I think there's LifeLock, there are numerous companies that offer to sell you protection. Should we, I mean, just for peace of mind, do those things work? Do you think it's worthwhile? What do we consider?
So I know, and I don't know, I agree with you on this. I think they do offer peace of mind. And so that's something that you're worried about, concerned about. My dad, who's, concerned about a lot of things with the Internet, and he's actually, my mom and dad are pretty Internet savvy. But he was getting calls from these folks who were trying to fix his computer remotely, and he was concerned that they were able to get information about him from working on his computer remotely. And so he was worried about it to the point where it was actually keeping him up at night. So he did use one of those companies, I don't know which one, but it just gave him the peace of mind to know that if something happened, there was some protection. I can't vouch for them if anything does happen. I don't know what their Better Business Bureau ratings are, but if you're interested in your concern, I would follow up with maybe a Better Business Bureau search, find the best one, and use it, because it does offer peace of mind. My father was much better once he obtained that service.
In general, David, do you have any...
Although, can I go back for one sec? They kept calling him, to check on things.
Oh, did they?
And so he said, listen, I hired you for your service. I don't want you to make me nervous. If there's a problem, let me know, but don't just keep calling me to tell me that you've got this concern or that concern. Make sure it's a real problem.
Oh, that's good to know. Something else to be vigilant about.
Right.
How do we really get to know that we've been hacked in a timely manner? Never mind the bank statement or the credit card statement. I think at times, sometimes someone else could give you an email and say, I think you've been hacked because this website that you have as a link that you never sent is an indication. I don't think you do this, David, did you? Maybe a friend might tell you, but how do you get to know that your social media account has been tapped, or your credit card? How do you get to know that?
Yeah, that's hard. But I think you need to keep some vigilance about charges on your credit card accounts. You need, sometimes, and I've seen this, they hack in and they take your contact information from your emails and send out emails. And I know you've probably seen these where someone's sending out an email that I'm stuck in a foreign country and I need you to send me money. And I know a lot of folks, especially some elderly folks, who have been caught up in that and have sent money. I was actually with a fellow, I haven't even talked to him about this yet, but I was at his office on a Monday, and on Tuesday I got an email from him that he was stuck in Istanbul. So I was pretty confident that he hadn't gotten there in one day and gotten stuck, but people don't know. So it's just a matter of being vigilant and keeping track of different, your information and what's being used out there about you.
I hear that it is wise to have a piece of paper that lists all of your numbers, all of your passwords, etc. Then you have a problem of even that being stolen. Does it make sense that that ends up being stored somewhere that can be safe and is possibly unhackable?
Unhackable. Yeah. So again, now it's very interesting. You see these commercials in software companies that sell you password protector. You're right. And so I'm thinking, do I want to take all of my passwords and put them in one place that is theoretically protected on the internet or on my computer, where someone who's smarter than those companies that create that software may sometime figure out a way to get into all of that? Why not write it all down and put it in a safe deposit box or something like that? I know it's old-fashioned, but to me, if you want to protect your passwords, The safest way would be to put it on paper, lock the paper up in a safe deposit box, and then you know where it is and you can get it when you need it.
Isn't it interesting that it's maybe the non-technological solution that may be safest to handle?
You wonder, and that's me as well. I'm old by computer standards, so that's what I would do. My kids may look at me and say, you know, you're a little bit crazy, you're a little paranoid, but you see these things, you hear these things about people able to get into your computer, able to check things on your own, hardware on your computer, software on your computer. No one knows how to get into my safe deposit box, I would hope, except for the bank.
Good to know. So back on the issue about being hacked, if you have found that you've been as vigilant as you can, as soon as you found out that your card account number was stolen, you've called, you've tried to put a cease on that number, have another one issued, I understand that you should be contacting contacting those who issue credit reports even more than once a year. If you had your free one for once a year, should you still go to each one of those three, Experian, Equifax, whatever TransUnion? Do you need to contact each one of those? Do you need to do it in writing? How do you process that, and what extent do you have to go to make sure that you're not forever going to be denied credit in the future?
Certainly, if there's information that you think that they should have, I would absolutely contact all three of them. Different banks use one, two, or maybe all three for different things. And if the information is the same on each one, you're best protected by doing that. So the short answer to that question is, if there's any information that you feel they need to have, you need to contact them. They'll then tell you what their process is for getting information, if you can, onto your report so that it shows up when someone inquires into your credit. And
what should you do if at the same time you happen to be unfortunate enough to want to get a loan while all this is going on? As if it isn't often complicated enough for someone to go through that process while just trying to secure a better loan or home equity or whatever they're doing. If all this is going on, how do you put your finger in the dike and beyond just saying, please don't check that credit right now because I haven't had time to have it scrubbed or expunged or whatever. How do you handle that?
So,
do we need a lawyer?
No, not necessarily, not for that. If you're applying for a home line of credit, for example, you're usually doing it through a bank or bank branch where there's people you know there and they're dealing with you. Unfortunately, what happens is all the information for the approval goes out to some unknown area, some third person called an underwriter, who looks at all this information and makes whatever determination needs to be made. And oftentimes you'll hear back from the person you're dealing with at the bank who has some intelligence and some knowledge about you about certain questions. And I've seen silly questions like, you have given them information on dividends and stocks and other assets that you own and get for income, and they want to know, well, we'd like to see the tax return for that company. Well, you might own a share of IBM, you don't own IBM, so you're never going to get the bank IBM's tax return. So they have to write a letter to the underwriter and say, you might not recognize this as a publicly held corporation, but it is, so you're not getting a tax return for that corporation and there's no need for you to have it. So if there's something on your credit that shows up, they'll ask you to explain it, and if it's at all a reasonably logical bank or underwriter, you'll be able to explain it.
And to continue on this thought, what happens if it's actually the bank that ends up having a problem where you had some unauthorized transaction at the bank and the bank doesn't want to stand by you, doesn't want to honor it? They do want to debit your account that amount because it's still in question or it hasn't been investigated. Or what do you do then, David?
Well, that's when you have to go to the bank manager, and maybe above the bank manager's head if there's a district manager, depending on what bank it is. And usually you will get to somebody that will deal with it. Now, if you're talking about a fairly substantial amount of money and clearly it's their problem, their issue, then that's where you might want to go and talk to an attorney, because we have had cases where, in fact, I can think of one where somebody came to me because there was some money put into her account through an annuity that was actually in the mom's name, and then the bank took the annuity out of her name, the deposit, and it was a back and forth for a number of years. When she finally came to me, I filed suit. We got it straightened out within a couple of weeks.
But still, you were needed to be called in at this level, or?
That she had reached the end of her line. The frustration level had gone beyond anything she could take anymore, and she wasn't getting any answers, so I came in afterwards.
Talk about scope of problem. How about even the IRS, those electronic tax returns, or even the paper tax returns? Somehow, somewhere, someone manages to scoop your IRS refund, your IRS identity. I wish they could if I had to pay a bill, but it's usually when you have a return coming in. What do you do then?
Well, again, there's a process through the IRS, and if you use an accountant, that's usually a good place to start. They can help you try to maneuver as to figuring out where the problem came in, what the breakdown was, because a lot of times you're filing electronically and you give them an account to put the refund into, so that information's in there. So if it's intercepted somewhere, you have to figure out why. Many times I have had clients whose return was intercepted because of child support that was due. Well, that's legitimate. There's some regulations that require that. So you have to figure out what happened and why, and then take the proper course. Usually, if you use an accountant, I'd start with the accountant and let them try to guide you to where you need to go.
They'd be liable if they were electronically filing your return, are they not?
If it was a problem that originated on their end, there could be some liability.
Which could be traceable?
Well,
sometimes you don't know where it started.
Well, and then so they may try to pass the blame on down to the IRS, and so you have to go ahead and try to figure out through all of those avenues where the problem came from and what happened. Maybe there was an error on the return that had a wrong routing number for the deposit. You know, where did the error come from? What was the error? And then work your way through how you correct it.
So does this end up reaching the lawyer level because you can do more forensics than I can, for example?
It's possible. There's some things that we can do through discovery if we had to file suit to figure those things out. There are lawyers who specialize in taxes and tax issues who might be able to cut through the maze a little quicker than you can. So that's absolutely a possibility. Again, it depends on how much is in question and where the mistake came from.
And for the things that you can anticipate, such as I know what merchants are going to be affected, I know what X date my credit card should be paying and now it can't. What do you do to anticipate and deal with what could be years of issues cropping up? I mean, I guess when I was referring to the loan that you want to apply for, if it's happening right when that's going on, you know how to deal with it. But years later, you think it's all resolved, and how many will come back later and say, I have other dings on my credit, I have something else going on, I can't get the loan, another obstacle, another merchant doesn't want to do business with you. What do you do when how do you even know that that's what it's about, and how do you end up grappling with that? You think you've done everything you could do to scrub the accounts, and you find that it's 4 and 5 years later, and the hassles linger. What do you do then? Do you sue them?
Well, not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
One thing you might start with, if you were concerned about that and you're worried about ongoing issues, is to regularly check your credit report. And you have a right to a free credit report each year, so you can use that system. There are companies that will actually monitor your credit for you. We talked a little bit about that. That's similar to the identity protection companies. There's another thing, too. And that is, if you have an issue with credit and you think it's resolved and it comes up again later, you can go through the same issues that you went through the first time and try to fix them at a later date when they come up. But I think all in all, the best step is to take some effort to monitor what's going on your credit report on a yearly basis.
Sounds good to be vigilant. And what about the identity theft that happens by way of your website? Your identity is hacked through your website, through your social media. It's not so easy to pick up the phone and dial Mr. Facebook, Mr. Google, and any of these things. And often, if your computer's been hacked, spyware, malware, sometimes you can't even get into your email. Then what?
Well, again, it comes down to how is it affecting you and what steps do you need to take to protect yourself. So if it's just a matter of your social media has been hacked, maybe you close it down and contact them and go through the process of opening up again somewhere else in some other fashion. I don't have a Facebook account, something I've stayed away from, so I can't tell you what their rules and regulations are, but I'm sure that there's going to be a customer service department there that you can deal with if something like that's come up.
I know over the many segments that we've covered, you've often talked about how important it is to document every single thing that you did. I actually, in doing some research here, found that there was good reason and good value to set up a timeline of every single phone call, email, snail mail, posted letter that you sent, so that if you need to defend your position, which you shouldn't have to if you're an innocent victim, but let's say you have to, that actually this could go on for months. You need separate files for every merchant, every fraud department in every merchant. It's amazing to hear that that could possibly have ever been necessary, and it is?
Well, it is. In fact, I would go beyond that a little bit. You deal with someone in customer service, and I would get the name, of course the date and time you have when you made the call, and document what you discussed and who you talked with, so that you actually have a name if it comes back to it and they say, well, you didn't call it, so I called it this time, this is the person I talked with, and this is what we did.
Does every merchant have an identity theft record that they've maintained on you even after something's happened, or is that not necessary? And should I have it?
I'm not sure that a merchant maintains that. I'm sure that there's some, for instance, let's take that Target situation. First of all, one of the things that they did was they offered people who were hacked through that credit card usage issue a free year or two of these credit and identity protection services. It was one of their tokens to give back to the customer. But I'm sure that what they do is they go through the whole process of what happened, what went wrong, how were they hacked, to try to come up with ways of protecting themselves and you from things like that happening again.
Sounds right. And one other form of hacking that we haven't talked about, although we've talked about cell phones, how about, well, I know that Rupert Murdoch had some problems with his phones being hacked, and what played out with a murder case. But if you have had your cell phone voicemail hacked or remotely accessed against your knowledge, is that something that you're liable for, something that you've said that now the government uses? Can they use that against you without a warrant, or do they have to have very good reason, as we were talking about privacy last session?
Last time. Yeah, so I think it goes back to a little bit about what we talked about, where they do require a warrant to get the information on your phone and to be able to look at that. They do have to have a warrant to wiretap. Now, what's been interesting in that whole field is, do they need a warrant to pick up wireless transmissions that they can just get? And there's some case law that says they do not need a warrant in those situations because it's put out there publicly. Not sure if any Supreme Courts have weighed in on that more recently, but that was sort of the status of the law at one time.
Won't that be something to watch for? Now, if they're saying that government can't do that, suppose it's a private investigative company. Is that different? Are they above or beyond the laws we talked about, an employer as opposed to the government?
Sure. Well, we talked about the Fourth Amendment, the rules that apply in the Fourth Amendment apply to government, not to private individuals.
So you have to you really do have to be vigilant, even with what you're saying on the phone, lest somebody is, especially if you're doing something that you shouldn't be.
Right.
Well, thank you for tuning in. Our discussion of legal matters would continue. Join us.